Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is my review of the Trijicon RCR. As you guys know, I'm almost 100% Patreon exclusive these days. This video was previously seen by my Patreon supporters, and almost every video goes to Patreon, doesn't ever make it to YouTube, but I do release the occasional YouTube video, and I knew there was going to be a big demand for this one, so I went ahead and put it out. If you want to catch the videos first and see videos you can't see here, head on over to patreon.com/Sage Dynamics and become a supporter. Thanks a lot. Ruggedized closed reflex. It is the first enclosed pistol optic from Trijicon, and to some opinions it's taken much too long. But as I've said in plenty of videos, especially in regards to optics, you don't have to do it first, you just have to do it best. Whether Trijicon did that or not remains to be seen. This is my standard 2,000 round review process, my duty testing, no deviation throughout the process. I usually film the first 2,000 rounds. However, I continue the evaluation until I reach 20,000 rounds where the optic just breaks, which, as you know, has happened. I went up to Michigan in February of this year and got a first look at these optics. No camera work, no photos, nothing like that, just to get a feel and talk to the engineers directly and have them explain to me the thought process behind their design. And that gave me a lot of valuable information when finally receiving the sights and actually starting to put them through the testing process. I would have liked to have had them much sooner, but Trijicon does things the way that they do them, and I can't really complain because I did get a first look and some in-depth information on the engineering behind their thought process. The biggest thing for Trijicon with the RCR was they did not want to use someone else's footprint, and they did not want to deviate from what has become one of the industry standards, which is the RMR footprint. So this optic has a very unique mounting system. You won't see it anywhere else, at least not yet, and there is a patent on their particular interface. They're using a capstan screw. If you're not familiar, capstan screws are most likely found in pianos, which I thought was kind of interesting. And I'd had a similar idea like this, but mine was way more complicated because I'm not an engineer. Theirs is pretty straightforward, but it does limit you to specific types of RMR footprints. If you have raised posts, you're either not going to be able to mount this thing, or you're going to have to create a way that's not necessarily recommended to mount this thing. It does come with a number set of screws, the optic itself, as well as your 2032 battery. I mounted it on an Agency Arms RMR cut, which is the standard cut, no raised post, recoil lugs. I mounted it on a Gen 4 17, which is a 17C, or it was turned into a 17C by Agency Arms for the review process to start getting through the 2,000 rounds. The first thing you'll notice about it is it has a very similar, if not the same, deck height as the RMR, with a window size that's comparable to a lot of the enclosed emitter optics that are out there, including like the Acro, the EPS, etc., etc. There is a noticeable notch filter from Trijicon because they love their battery life, and I'm not mad at them for it. Some people don't care for that notch filter. They don't like the bluish tint. I don't personally care because I'm target focused anyway, and my other eye, the eye that's not behind the optic, is picking up a non-bluish tint data, combining those two images inside my brain to give me my sight picture. 3.25 MOA dot with easy adjustments. The buttons are actually comically large, which gave me a little bit of a pause. They're very recessed as well as they can be, but there's no protective shroud or abutment or ledge or parapet or whatever term you want to use. So when working this optic from concealment, I might be concerned about bumping those buttons. As far as features go, you've got 1x magnification, you've got 1 click to 1 MOA adjustments, and the adjustments are very similar to what you're going to find on the RMR, so no surprises there. Waterproof to 20 meters. The battery life is quoted at 6 years of continuous use at setting 5 of 10. Most people are going to bump it up a little bit higher than that depending on your environment, so split the difference, you're still looking at over a year of battery life, 3 years even conservatively, which is what we've come to expect from Trijicon's products. Once I got it mounted, took it to the range, got it zeroed, and started my testing process. One of the first things I do, and I don't know if I ever spoke about this directly in a video, but it's something I do, is, and it's a drill I use for practice where I'll do 1-second exposures. And I know I've talked about that in videos before. And this is kind of my first evaluation of an optic as far as window size goes, because there is such a thing as too small of a window because humans aren't machines. So our presentation, no matter how mechanic or how mechanical, isn't. So one of the things I like to do in my optic evaluations is do that 1-second exposure. My whole goal here is to be able to draw from a duty holster and get a sight picture within 1 second consistently. And this window is generously provides the ability to do that. And then adding rounds into the equation to start getting a feel for the recoil behavior, the refresh rate of the dot. Everything is what I would expect from Trijicon as far as performance goes in that regard. And that was like usually the first 50 to 100 rounds. And then I really get into running the optic like I normally would during my usual practice. A get to know you kind of phase. The brightness settings are fantastic. You've got an entire level of brightness available, as well as night vision settings, and you've got an ultra bright setting at the very top, which is, unless you are literally going to space to fight the sun, I can't imagine you needing that setting. However, the possibility does exist. So I wasn't really concerned about the brightness levels becoming an issue during the review process, problems that I've had with the optics in the past. So that first 500 rounds, it felt very familiar to an RMR as far as dot presentation, refresh rate, window size, everything just felt the same, which is kind of what I like. But in the back of my head, I started to worry about that mounting system, because you can't torque it in a traditional way. You can't use an actual torque wrench because the way the capstan screws are installed. So that did give me pause going into that first drop test, and then getting into the burn down, and then of course the rest of the review process. So after that first 500 rounds, I went ahead and got to that first drop test, and I was very concerned that on that drop, something was going to happen. But it didn't. Maintained zero after that first drop test, and I got into the burn down. For those of you that are not familiar, the burn down is 500 rounds, which is a unrealistic amount of fire, especially for a handgun, in the shortest amount of time possible, to see if that accelerated rate of fire, heat, reciprocation will identify issues that the same round count wouldn't identify in a much longer period of time. So 4 to 5 minutes versus 4 to 5 weeks, months, years, etc. Here's your burn down. Knocked that burn down out with my registered auto sear, throwing on that 17, so we got a lot of full auto in there, which is probably something this optic won't experience a lot of, although I can see popularity being a thing, people mounting these on submachine guns and things like that. Not really an AR-centric optic, not something I would use personally. So handgun, PCC, or a backup red dot on a rifle is mainly where you're probably going to see this. Got into that second drop test and then kind of kept it moving from there. One of the big failing points of optics is an inability to navigate varied lighting conditions. And I've already said I'm very happy with the brightness settings on the RCR. But in transient light or backlighting or what they call photonic barriers, and then getting into night vision, low light, things like that, I don't want to have to mess with my buttons a whole lot. So what I do with my carry gun is I choose a brightness setting that works well in all lighting conditions I'm likely to encounter, and that's where I keep it. And that's exactly what I did with the RCR, except for demonstrating on video different brightness settings. And when I went to night vision, and I did test the low light settings or the night vision settings there, but I don't use night vision settings on my optics because my pedigree of night vision was military, but then into law enforcement, my biggest concern and just real life experience showed me that if I'm in a night vision setting and I'm using night vision and I have to go to white light, I don't want to also have to make adjustments to my optic before I transition from what we call green to white. So I keep it at that same brightness setting the entire time, and that's what I did with the RCR. And regardless of the lighting condition, if the sun was behind the range, behind the target, to the left, to the right, behind me, lighting conditions in low light, everything worked fantastically as far as not only the dot acquisition and the dot brightness, but the refresh rate. The tint wasn't an issue, not something I personally notice. I think some people, when they're getting into optics, they tend to fixate on certain things, or they're chasing the marginal advantage. We're definitely at a race towards the bottom here with optics. 7 years ago, 10 years ago, there were only a couple of choices for durable optics. Now we have a lot, so people want to know which one is the best, and I think it's going to come down a lot of the times to features, subjectivity, or purpose. Another thing worth mentioning is I got a lot of RMRs. So I compared the RCR to a lot of the RMRs in the same dot size, that 3.25. And I don't know if Trijicon changed the materials or the glass or the emitter style or whatever, but this 3.25 MOA dot is very consistently crisp. Now I only have a sample size of 1, so I can't compare it to another RCR, but dot quality was fantastic. I generally like dots around 2 MOA or smaller. If someone made a half MOA dot, I would use it. because it lets me see more and more on my target and more precisely track my recoil behavior when I'm using the dot. But 325 is fine. I'm even fine with bigger than that, but preference. I like the smallest dot possible that's going to be usable at all brightness settings. Using this thing in low light, fantastic. That same consistent brightness setting I was using, I was on setting 7 throughout the process, and sometimes I'd bump it up to 8 just to see if there'd be a huge difference or there'd be an advantage there, but there really wasn't. Buttons are easy to use. You have a positive feel, tactile feel to them. They're not as stiff as the RMR buttons. I think that owes largely to the larger size of the button. I don't know how well the material is going to hold up long term, but throughout the review process, no issues whatsoever. Under low light, there's really not anything to say. It was boringly reliable. Everything was consistent. Now, the RCR doesn't have the features that the RMR HD does, which we'll cover in a future video, very soon future video. It doesn't have the intuitive light auto adjustment, and I kind of wish they put that in there. I like that idea. Past optics, your auto adjust only optics, they weren't smart enough to know the lighting conditions you were actually in. They would just perceive darkness or light, and they'd adjust based on that. They wouldn't perceive if you were using a weapon light or if the target was backlit or side lit or whatever. This optic doesn't do that. It doesn't have a forward-facing sensor to kind of split the difference between the light from the shooter's perception and the light down range. I wish they put that in there. That's probably my biggest complaint, is that wasn't a feature that was added. I mean, I'm sure there's an engineering reason for why they didn't, and maybe they will add it in the future. That would be excellent. My overall impression of the footprint and size, people are going to make jokes. They're going to complain. Everybody uses the mailbox jokes like they're the first person to say it. I don't really necessarily personally care what it looks like. It is interesting in shape perception. There are other optics that are similarly shaped, but they were kind of married to a certain style because of the footprint and the fact that they were able to get an enclosed emitter on the existing RMR footprint using those capstan screws. Getting into the long-term durability testing, I don't know how consistently well those capstan screws are going to hold up as far as torque goes, so you're definitely going to want to witness mark them. I'm not saying I had a failure with them, and we'll get to that, but it does concern me. Night vision handgun shooting is a very niche application of an optic on a handgun, but people do it and people want to know about it. If you're using binocular night vision, like PVS 15s or BVDs or something like that, not really a big issue because you've got another eye, again, not behind the gun, picking things up. If you're using binocular, like a PVS 14 or something like that, it is a larger concern as far as light transmission through the optic goes. The consistent aggravation for me filming review processes is filming what night vision sees and what the eye actually sees are two consistently and dramatically different things. And I really want to reiterate that. What you may see on video is limited to the quality of the night vision tube. You can use the best camera in the world and it's only going to film the quality of the night vision. Also, most filming doesn't properly grade light in a way that gives you a true perception of what the user is actually seeing. So yes, I did shoot it quite a bit under night vision. I have PVS 15s, so I've got binocular night vision, but I ran it with a monocular as well, using a green phosphor PVS 14, which is the one I usually use to film my night vision stuff with, and I didn't really have any issues. The night vision settings are awesome if you're gonna use them. But again, I ran on that setting, that normal daytime brightness setting, and I didn't have any issues whatsoever, target and consistency. The big thing is night vision magnifies light. So however big the dot is, and then whatever the brightness setting is, you can expect some blooming and some halo effects to occur. To counteract that, that's why you use a IR capable weapon light. So you can push IR light down range and kind of polarize the situation in a way to where if you can't see the target because of the dot, the blooming, the light, everything like that, you turn on your IR light, it kind of equals everything out, and then you're able to pick up your target, go ahead and shoot and engage. So for night vision use, for low light use, fantastically impressed with the overall performance. Bringing us towards the end of things. Through the process, I do a lot of one-handed manipulations. That's one of the tests to determine if the optic, and again, this was a concern going back to those capstan screws, was one-handed manipulations going to be an issue? And the whole purpose behind one-handed manipulations is it's not a red dot specific thing. We've been teaching it in handgun shooting for a very long time. If you don't have your other hand to manipulate the gun, you use the rear sight. When you have an optic, you use the optic to manipulate the slide if you have a malfunction or something like that. So I'll introduce dummy rounds into a magazine and work it off of various surfaces to try to see if it's going to dislodge or cause any zero issues, or damage the glass or something like that. It wasn't a problem I had. My biggest concern as far as the lenses go is the rear lens, not the front lens. The front lens is well recessed. It's very RMR centric in that regard. The rear lens has a very, very faint overhang or shroud. And granted, the rear is less likely to encounter objects and debris and contact with the environment, but it's still a possibility. I've had other optics where the rear lens did get delaminated or cracked, or some kind of abrasive contact took place. So throughout the process, I was concerned with that. But I wasn't really going to encounter it during one-hand manipulations or general use. If it was going to occur, it was going to occur during the drop testing, which is one drop every 500 rounds. Getting to that point, every time I dropped the gun, I checked the zero. And throughout the drop test, that's one of the biggest concerns, but I also check it during one-hand manipulations. Bringing us to the end, how well did the RCR hold up? Did it lose zero? Well, first, I'll show you guys my initial confirmation zero group. This group was shot 5 rounds of 124 grain gold dot at the zero distance of 25 yards. Right after I zeroed it, fired one more group for camera. Now here are your drop tests. One drop every 500 rounds. And then checking the truth. Did it maintain zero throughout 2,000 rounds, as well as 4 shoulder height drop tests on flagstone? Here is your final 5-round group, 124 grain gold dot, fired at 25 yards. So at least initially, 2,000 rounds is toddler age for most firearms related components. You're just getting familiar, you're just getting into it. Now these 2,000 rounds were very hard. And that's kind of the purpose of my duty testing, is they're my own personal goalposts that I then share with you. And right now I'm very pleased with the optic, and my initial concerns, at least right now, over those capstan screws have been dismissed. Now, I don't know long term, looking at my own witness marks, and they never loosened up, but proper torquing is a little bit more complicated. So I do have a concern about that. But right now, the gun is still zeroed after 2,000 rounds and those 4 shoulder high drop tests, and I didn't encounter any functional damage to the optic. Yeah, it's a little marred up. From that accelerated and almost sometimes unrealistic hard use that I put it through. But I like my goalposts to be just outside the realm of reality, so I can trust the optic to encounter the more mundane nature of duty use or regular use. The drop testings aren't necessarily because I think someone's going to drop their gun from shoulder height, but people do drop guns. It's just to simulate a rapid or sudden shock being delivered to the firearm. And in collecting data through my Red Dot instructor class, the most common optic breakage is either from a drop or the optic is damaged while it's still in the holster. When an officer is in a fight on the ground, body weight is suddenly applied, maybe the officer is knocked down, or maybe he's pushed into a wall, or his weight combined with the suspect's weight rolls over the top of the holster. And there's some optics that just don't hold up to that, and the holster can't be responsible for that kind of protection to a certain degree. Holster compatibility, again, I feel like I should mention that. I use the Safari Lens 70S throughout the review process, but it is also compatible with the 6000 series. No issues there. The battery compartment is top mounted. It is recessed, and I know some Trijicon optics have had issues with that in the past, but dropping this thing on its top 4 times, sometimes it hits at a slight angle. No direct contact to that battery cap because it's recessed, so you'd have to have a really specific kind of drop, and they did increase, if you look inside the battery compartment, they definitely increased the contact strength, if you will, to make it a more durable battery connection. So even if you do have an inadvertent direct battery cap contact, you're not necessarily likely to have any issues arise from that. I certainly did it. So 2,000 rounds, 4 drop tests, Burndown, all the shooting I'd done, night vision, low light, daylight, varied lighting conditions, different distances, checking out the quality. What's my final opinion of the RCR? I like it a lot. I don't know if I'm going to buy like 10 of them to replace my RMRs. There's nothing wrong with the RMR. I don't really have a problem with it. Everybody's fixated on I have to have an enclosed emitter, I have to have an enclosed emitter, I have to have a closed emitter. If you want to stay Trijicon and you want to have an enclosed emitter, well, this is your optic. And if your footprint supports it, and if your RMR footprint doesn't have raised posts, it will. unless you self-engineer a way to make it work on raised posts, and I'd be curious to know how you did it. This is a fantastic choice. It's ultimately going to come down to a quickly saturating market. There are so many enclosed optics right now for pistols. Is this going to be the one? And I think, again, that comes back to subjectivity and personal desire for features. I think from a durability standpoint, it speaks for itself, at least for my first 2,000 rounds. Long term, I think this optic is going to do very, very well. I don't consider it to be the best because that's subjective. It's definitely something I would recommend for duty use. It's definitely something I would recommend over other optics for duty use, but I don't really get into comparisons, as you guys know, because that's very subjective. It met every standard of my testing, just like other optics have. So it's hard for me to, unless I'm being subjective, say this one's better than that one. My first question would be, when you say which one's better, I'd be like, what are you looking for? And then we can have a conversation based on that, because there's plenty of optics that ride at the same level of performance and reliability. I'm going to continue to put rounds on this, and I'll give you guys an update as soon as I get the round count increased. Probably do a 10,000 round video here in the future. This thing will be going on the road with me, of course, so it's going to get a lot of rounds put through it by people who want to test drive it. So we're going to get that round count up there high and fast. So RCR, definitely a big thumbs up if that's a term you want to use. The price point, MSRP, is just over $800. I don't know what they're actually going to end up retailing for, so it might be cost prohibitive, especially when there are less expensive options available that also meet people's standards. So it's really going to come down to, like almost everything does, personal preference. Till next time, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, train accordingly.